The river Ythan flows for 39 miles through the heart of rural Aberdeenshire. For much of its course, the Ythan is a modest river whose gentle waters flow through a landscape rich in tradition. Scotland's rivers are among the country's greatest treasures. The enduring force of their seaward flow has shaped the landscape. Rivers are the life-giving arteries of history. The first people to settle Scotland used rivers as natural highways. They settled along their banks where towns and cities grew. In this series, I'm celebrating the rich and fruitful relationship between rivers and people, and meeting a cast of characters who live along the banks of our great waterways. In this programme, I'm setting off down the River Ythan on a grand tour that flows through tradition. My grand tour starts where the river rises and then follows it through fields towards a haunted castle, past a home to 1,000 babies, before arriving at the coast amongst abundant wildlife. I'm deep in rural Aberdeenshire, in the former parish of Strathbogie. Now, according to my map, I must be pretty close to the source of the River Ythan at a place called Ythan Wells. But so far, there's no obvious signs of a river, just fields. Arriving in the village, I decide to ask for some local advice. Excuse me, I'm looking for the Wells of Ythan.
You found it?
I found it. They're here?
Yes, they're here. They're in the copse just opposite
really?
there.
Friendly native Mike Milne takes me to the bottom of his garden and shows me the source of the river. Oh, look at that, that's it.
The source of the River Ythan.
It's just spontaneously bubbling to the surface.
Yes.
And this is where it starts its journey, what, 60, 63 kilometres all the way to the North Sea?
That's right.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
The River Ythan flows through some of the most productive agricultural land in the country, where farming has been the mainstay of the local economy for centuries. In the past, the people who lived on the land also worked the land, either as farmers or farm labourers. And in an age before machines, it must have been back-breaking work. And depending on the season, these fields would have been filled with men, women and children, all gathering in the harvest, haymaking, ploughing or planting. But these days, the fields are largely empty of people. A single machine can bale a field in less than a day, when it took hundreds of man-hours to build stacks to dry the hay. To get a sense and a feel for the work that was the rhythm of country life, I'm joining Robbie Gordon and his pal Geordie Smart to lend a hand building a haystack in the traditional way. Robbie gives me instructions as the wind does its best to blow away the small haystack, known locally as a coal.
Take a forkful, turn your fork so that you turn it up and down on, and keep it to this side a little blow.
Whoa, whoa, it's so windy, look at that.
Yep.
It's quite difficult in this wind.
Yes,
It's not wanting to stay in place, to be honest. I mean, it's hard work, isn't it? If you're spending all day and every day doing this,
yes,
which you would do, I guess.
And you'd have been lifting much bigger forkfuls as
I'm
well.
Just lifting very puny before.
And you'd have been doing this non-stop right through to evening.
And was it a happy time?
Oh yes.
Haymaking, or was it just back-breaking?
Well, no, it was good and enjoyable because you only make hay when the sun shines, if you like. So you know, it was always a fine day when you're out.
The biggest task today is securing the haystack against the wind. For that, we need a rope, and it's going to come from an obvious but strangely unexpected source. You have to make your own rope, do you, from the very material that we're stacking from the hay?
Yes, the rope would be made with the coal itself.
While Robbie's pal Geordie tries to hold down the coal, I'm handed an antiquated-looking implement called a thraw hook. With this simple instrument, we're going to make magic.
Turn the handle, twist and move backwards.
Look at that. It's forming a rope, a rudimentary rope. But I guess this is how they used to make them, what, centuries ago?
Yes, so probably right back to the very start of making hay.
I'm amazed at how quickly and simply the rope is formed as Robbie feeds in more hay. In just a couple of minutes, we have enough to secure the coal against the rising wind.
It's simple, you just twist it into the coal itself and then you tuck it in.
It anchors itself into the hay.
Right.
The rope might be fine for securing a haystack, but perhaps less useful for tethering a hungry cow. Rural life in days gone by depended on traditional skills that Robbie is keeping alive. The work was coloured by the language of the people who lived and toiled beside the river Ythan, when the fields rang with a dialect of the northeast known as the Doric. To find out about this rich heritage, I'm meeting up with Dawn Leslie, who speaks the Doric herself.
Now, Dawn, you're a native of these parts.
I am indeed.
And I think that's reflected in the way you speak. You're a Doric speaker.
I am, yeah. I don't usually speak Doric to somebody who doesn't speak it back to me, but I'll try.
You can speak it to me.
I'll try my best today. I'll speak Doric light to you.
Doric light?
Yeah.
So, I mean, could you begin by telling us what Doric is?
So Doric is a dialect of Scots, and Scots is a Germanic language. It's one of the indigenous languages to Scotland. Scots comes from a common source with English. But in the Middle Ages, they sort of developed a bit differently and they took different paths so that now they're quite distinct from each other. So we've got dialects of Scots all over Scotland and Doric is one of them.
It's full of kind of rich expressions and strange, archaic sounding words and expressions like CFX and fit likes and
you'll be well tuned in now,
and
good.
I love them. And Chavanawa. Can you explain what Chavanawa means?
Chavanawa is a surfect. This is the problem. I can only usually try and think of how to describe Doric phrases with other Doric phrases. So I say it's a surfect.
It's like a surfect.
Yeah, it's a surfect. So if something's hard work. There's lots of features in North East Scots that are quite different from other places. So probably the most famous thing you'll have heard of is the F.
The F?
Yeah.
Yeah, where does that? Everything with the WH seems to be pronounced F.
Yeah.
Like fit like.
Fit like and far you fae, far about
Far you fae.
Yeah.
Where are you from?
Yeah, where are you from?
Far you fae. That's brilliant, isn't it? Far
yeah.
you fae. What about quines and loons?
Quines and loons, yeah. So this is
Fit like quine.
Fit like quine.
Is that rude?
Well.
Is it over affectionate?
No, I wouldn't say so. There was a bit of stooshy not long ago because I was going to something and somebody called me a quine.
Right.
And someone said it was disrespectful
to
call me a quine because I should be a wifey.
Right.
But
which I think sounds worse.
I think that's worse. I'm definitely not ready to be a wifey yet. So quine is a term for a sort of younger woman, and loon is a boy.
So I'm well past being a loon. What am I then? A manny?
You're a manny.
A manny.
You're definitely a manny.
Now, heaven forbid that Doric dies out, because I see it as part of the identity of this area. I mean, what do you think it actually means to be a Doric speaker?
I think it places you in the northeast. It gives you a sense of identity, as you said, and I think it would be a great shame if it died out. It would be awful boring if Aberdeen just sounded the same, wouldn't it? So folk just need to speak it to their bairns. That's the main thing.
I think it's a fantastic language. I love to hear the Doric, and I hope that it's going to last for generations to come.
Here's hoping.
I think Dawn is right. To lose the Doric would be to lose so much of the human character of the northeast, where the language seems to carry the imprint of the landscape. I should get going. There's rain in the lift, as they say in these parts. I'm now a good 6 miles from the source of the Ythan as I follow it towards the village of Fyvie. Just outside the village is the magnificent pile of Fyvie Castle.
Fyvie has a long history dating back to at least the 13th century, when it was used by the kings of Scotland as a royal hunting lodge.
It later passed to others, each of whom made their mark, adding, building and extending the castle. An impressive pair of knockers adorn the front door, summoning castle guide Carmen Cantz from the dark interior.
Hello.
Carmen is keen to show me one of her favourite relics, a chair that simulates the motion of a horse for ladies unable to ride outside.
So what do? Sit on it?
Yeah, you just jump on it and
So this is what a genteel Victorian lady would be expected to do
exactly.
if the weather was bad outside.
The weather was bad, or in winter, or snowy outside.
And how long do you think you'd spend doing this during the day?
Try it for 2 hours and you're going
2
to
hours.
probably.
That would be asking a bit much. I think this horse is playing up. Ooh. Bucked off.
Very good.
So that was fun. But I understand that Fyvie Castle has another kind of side to it, a darker side, a haunted side.
Yes, it has. So it's haunted by, we say, the Green Lady.
Have you ever seen the Green Lady?
No, I haven't seen the Green Lady, but I had some strange encounters. Lights going off and doors slamming shut for no reason.
In life, the Green Lady was Lilias Drummond, the wife of Alexander Seton, Chancellor of Scotland. Carmen takes me deep into the castle's interior to a room said to be haunted by the ghost of Lilias.
So the Green Lady is a presence in this room?
She is, yeah. So the story goes that Lilias Drummond was married to Alexander Seton. They had 5 children, but unluckily for her, it was 5 girls. And he wanted and needed his male heir. So we only know that she suddenly died in May 1601. Rumor was that she was poisoned or that she was starved to death.
Right.
And
Well, murdered.
yeah, murdered. But only a few months later, he married again her niece, Griselle.
Right. A younger model.
The younger model, a 16-year-old niece. And they had a wedding night in this room here, and during the night they had heavy sighs, scratching at the walls. Something strange was going on, so they couldn't figure out what it was. But when they looked out of the window the next morning, they found engraved in the windowsill Lilias Drummond's name. And you can still see it here.
But it's written back to front, as if it's written from outside. Now, if this is true, then that is physical evidence of the presence of a ghost and ghostly carving.
Exactly.
Do you believe it?
Might have been a stonemason.
I think it was probably a stonemason on a long ladder.
Although the paranormal evidence is less than convincing, Carmen has more to show me in a chamber known as the murder room, where some say Lilias was held prisoner. Pulling back the carpet, Carmen reveals an ancient stain that has been scientifically tested and found to be human blood.
So actually it's all over the floor.
Do you know what the cause of that blood stain is?
Some say that Lilias Drummond was kept in here, and the story goes that her kinsmen tried to free her, but were slaughtered in front of her, and their bodily parts thrown out of the window.
And you're hacked to pieces.
And then you have a big blood stain.
Yeah, it's a big cleaning up job to do. It was a hideous thought. Do these stories disturb you in any way?
No. No. I think it's a great place. It's a great place to work. You know, it's so much history going on, and I feel privileged to be able to work here.
Even to be in the presence of death, and death which is meted out in such a horrible way.
Leaving the ghostly chill of Fyvie Castle, it's a relief to be back outside and on my way again beside the River Ythan, which continues its eastward course through the braes of Mannoney. Here, the Ythan assumes a more picturesque appearance. There's even a touch of wildness about the steep, wooded banks where the river has cut deeply into the surrounding countryside. And perched above the Ythan is romantic Gight Castle. It was once the home of the poet Byron's family.
Now, this location has all the elements of one of Byron's later epic poems. A lonely but noble medieval castle on the edge of wild land. A frontier of civilization facing the untamed.
There is also a sorrowful air about the ruined walls of Gight Castle. Byron's father, known as Mad Jack, was a drinker and an inveterate gambler who built up huge debts. In 1787, with debts mounting, Gight Castle was sold to a relative who gave it to his adventurous young son, George Gordon, who was thrown from his horse and killed. In grief, the castle was abandoned and allowed to fall into ruin, a testament to the unfulfilled promise of youthful daring. Downstream in the village of Methlick, daring lives on, especially when it comes to heroic googlies and all things cricket. Beside the river, the Methlick Cricket Club, known as the MCC, plays not at Lord's, of course, but at Laird's. Where else? The club started in the 19th century and won a famous victory against the visiting Australian tourists in 1902, bowling them out for 8 runs. But sadly, that was some time ago. A mile further downstream from the village is Haddo House, a grand building designed in 1732 by the famous Scottish architect William Adam. Haddo was home to the poet Byron's wealthier Gordon relatives. They bought the place in the 18th century and were one of Scotland's most influential noble families.
Haddo House was also the birthplace of many children, over 1,200 in fact, and as far as we know, not a single one a Gordon.
When the Second World War broke out, the Marquess of Aberdeen transformed his ancestral home into a maternity home for expectant mothers evacuated from Scottish cities targeted by enemy bombers. The mums-to-be spent the first month of their confinement in the ballroom at Haddo Hall. When it was time to give birth, they were moved upstairs into the delivery room, Queen Victoria's bedroom no less. Joining me in the royal guest bedroom is Pat Edward. In 1945, this is where he came into the world.
Now, Pat, this is a really special place for you because this is where you were born.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. And the story is incredible because when the house was handed over to the National Trust, a short time after that, we came here to visit. And the guide that we had was a lady who'd been a midwife here.
Oh, really?
But we didn't know that until we came into this room. And she gave us a long spiel about this being Queen Victoria's bedroom and, you know, it was converted into being a labour room and all this sort of thing. And after she'd finished, she said, I don't suppose any of you were born here, were you? And I said, yeah, I was. Oh, she said, one of my babies. And she came towards me and she gave me a great big hug.
Now, I understand that not everyone came from Glasgow or from the south. There's quite a few local people use this facility. What were the circumstances behind your mother being brought here?
Well, she was living with her parents in Auchenblay, near Stonehaven, because father was away in the war. So she was sent up here.
Right. A month before she was due?
A month before she was due. And then she had me and then she was here for another month.
She must have been quite impressed by the grandeur of the place.
She was absolutely thrilled by that. I mean, she spoke about it very lovingly. She thought it was just an amazing place.
And you must feel quite proud to have been born here.
Oh, I feel exceptionally proud to be born here. And I have a kind of a spiritual attachment to the place. You know, Haddo means something special.
It's not far downstream to my next destination, the town of Ellon, which lies about 5 miles from the mouth of the River Ythan. There has been a crossing point here on the Ythan for many centuries, a fact which gave Ellon a strategic significance. The early crossing was probably a ford, which made use of the small island in the river. It's thought that this island probably gave Ellon its name, Yellon being the Gaelic for island.
In Victorian times, Ellon played host to a labour market. It was held here every 6 months or so and was where men and women came looking for work on the surrounding farms.
It's incredible to think that it was a legal requirement for all able-bodied folk under 60 years who hadn't the means to live on to make themselves available for hire at a price determined by the hirer.
So twice a year, those in need of work would come to a place like Ythan, carrying the tools of their trade and stand humbly, or perhaps defiantly, hoping to be hired at a rate set by their employer, which was rarely more than a pittance. It had a terrible similarity to a slave market.
From Ythan, it's just 5 miles to the mouth of the River Ythan. So very different from the rest of the river, it's a truly spectacular sight. We are now at the edge of the North Sea. On the northern shore of the wide estuary is an extraordinary place of sand, marram grass and shifting dunes. This is the Fyvie National Nature Reserve, where I'm meeting Reserve Manager Cat Reid in an area known as Scotland's Sahara.
It's truly a remarkable landscape, this, isn't it, Kat?
It truly is. Yeah. You almost feel a camel should wander over the horizon any second. Yeah, you're really seeing the sort of sand waves here. As you look out, there's a wave of sand to the south of us there, then it's blown out in the middle in that little hollow, and then we're standing on the edge of another wave of sand here. And you can see the dunes sort of sculpted all around us by the wind, all the little ripples in the sand.
And where does all the sand come from? A silly question, perhaps.
No, I mean, it would originally come from the mountains. Most of it was probably washed down at the end of the last ice age with the melting water from the glaciers. And it's that sand that's coming ashore and being blown and then re-eroding back into the river that's creating the sand we see here.
So it's the product of the ice age, really?
Yes, most of this would have probably been eroded sometime 10, 12,000 years ago.
And it's on the move, it's marching north. And there's a village to the north of us that became a victim to that.
It did, yes. Fyvie village was actually buried by moving sand, about 600 years ago. So, yeah, the sand is on the move and it does have an impact on people that would have lived in this landscape.
Leaving Scotland's Sahara, we walk across the sand and enter an area where marram grass has stabilised the dunes. Ahead of us are the low walls of a small ruin, the remains of the 8th century St Agnes Chapel. Beneath the sand dunes that cluster around it are the buried houses of Fyvie village, which was lost to the sand in medieval times.
So what happened to bury the village? Was there a storm or something that blew the sand in?
There was. This is a very dynamic landscape, and probably the sand was moving for many years, but there is a story that the village died because of a curse.
A curse?
A curse, right. Indeed. The nature of this particular curse is that 3 maidens were cast adrift in a leaky boat by their evil uncle who wanted them to die so he could inherit their land.
Right.
And they cursed the village that if ever maidens malison do light upon dry land, let naught be found in Fyvie's glebes but thistle, bent and sand. And what do you see around you?
I see
thistle, bent and sand.
I see sand.
So the maidens did light upon dry land, and when they set foot on shore, a massive 9-day storm blew up and buried the village.
Now, I'm assuming that's the legend, but is there anything actually in the historical record that indicates there's some truth behind this?
Yes, there is. There was a huge 9-day sandstorm in 1413 that hugely affected the whole of the east coast of Scotland. It cut the Port of Rattray off to the north of here and probably finished off Fyvie village at that point.
But the Fyvie Reserve isn't all about a buried past. It's a haven for a host of wildlife, including Atlantic seals and especially birds. Kat's colleague, Darrell Short, takes me to a place where it's safe to watch the famous Fyvie terns without disturbing them.
No, I can see a very massive small birds swirling around over there. Are those the terns, Darrell?
That's right, yeah. So we're looking down towards Fyvie's Ternery, which has been rightly called one of the jewels in the crown of the reserve. And this end of the season, it could be anything in the region of 15 to 20,000 birds down there.
That's amazing, and not just Arctic terns, other terns too.
No, that's right. We have Arctic and common terns, close relatives. We also have sandwich terns, a handful of little terns, and a very large population of black-headed gulls. So a lot going on down there.
The thing that really amazes me about these Arctic terns is the distance that they migrate.
Yep, that's the greatest traveller in the natural world there. We're at the southern end of their breeding range here at Fyvie. Some of them breed right up into the Arctic Circle. And in our winter, they'll head south through the open ocean, right down to the Antarctic for the Antarctic summer. So they see more daylight.
They get 2 summers?
They get 2 summers a year. They see more daylight than any other species on planet Earth.
That's amazing. So that must be, what, I don't know, 14,000 miles from here to the South Atlantic,
That's right, that's in a straight line.
Yeah.
So you can imagine they don't do it in a straight line, they're going to be all over the place. Yeah. So, yeah, they cover vast distances. Given the average family car's clapped out after about 150,000 miles, the distances these cover completely eclipse that.
And without an MOT.
Without an MOT.
Now, I hear that there is a major problem facing a lot of the birds on this reserve, and that's avian flu.
That's right, yeah. Real problem at the moment. We've seen bad outbreaks of avian flu in gannet colonies to the north and south of us. At the moment, touch wood, our ternery has got away with it so far. They're approaching the end of their season, and we're really hoping that they're able to fledge their young and disperse before we get a serious outbreak.
Because it would rip through that colony, wouldn't it, very quickly?
It would, yes. We've had reports from similar colonies to this on the Channel coast in France and in Holland, with up to an 80% mortality rate among sandwich terns, so it's a serious business.
That is horrific, isn't it? Well, here's hoping. Here's hoping, little terns, you managed to escape the worst of it.
Heading away from the terns, I reached the right bank of the river mouth, where in former years there was a fishing station catching salmon and sea trout.
There's a long history of salmon fishing right along the east coast of Scotland. Now, various techniques were employed, including elaborate static traps to catch the fish.
The fish traps consisted of thousands of feet of netting strung out at low tide between wooden stakes. They covered large areas of the shoreline and river mouth. But because of declining numbers, commercial salmon fishing was banned in 2016. No fish have been netted on the Ythan since.
Although netting is banned, angling continues with rod and line, and the Ythan has a reputation as a fine river for sea trout, one of the finest in Europe, in fact, so it seems only right that I should try my luck.
Fish were once so plentiful in the river that salmon and sea trout would sometimes jump into anglers' fishing boats. But in recent years, there's been a dramatic decline in the numbers of fish returning to the river.
And no one's quite sure why. It could be climate change, it could be overfishing at sea, poor food supplies, disease, a whole combination of different factors. But the fish are not coming back to the rivers as often as they used to, which probably explains why I'm not having much luck. Or it could just be me and my rather poor fishing technique. Try again.
But then there's more to fishing than just catching a fish. It's about more intangible things. It's a bit more zen.
Being on the river puts you directly in touch with nature and gives you plenty of time to reflect on the great imponderables in life. So with rod in hand and the river before me, this is an ideal place for me to end my grand tour down the River Ythan.